Hi, we're back to creating this cobblestone, and we're going to start to colorize it. But before we do that, I just want to go and talk about what makes a good tileable texture. I know I mentioned it before, but I wasn't really satisfied with how it came out and what we talked about. And basically, when looking at a tiling texture, there's several things to look at. The short answer is practice, but some general guidelines below that I take into account is, for example, frequency of the shapes and forms. Maintaining an alike frequency of details in the texture tile when it comes to form, size, length, rotation, and depth will make something seem like it's more tiled than not. So paying attention to what the size, in this case the cobblestones, how they're rotating, how big they are in conjunction to each other, will make it look more tiley or not. In some cases, you do want to make textures that look extremely tiley for a good reason, especially when it comes to like architectural stuff. And so, for example, if I'm making gravel textures and all of a sudden only a few of the gravel chunks are significantly bigger or smaller than others, you will visually get the viewer's attention, and that is when the player will notice a tile if you're playing a game. If as well as any movie, etc., you'll be able to tell that that's a tiling texture. So maintaining uniformity helps in this situation. What's great about Substance Designer is that in general you're working procedurally, and because of that, most stuff that you do will be tiled by nature. Also, focusing on color and value, we'll start to talk about that on this part of the tutorial. When it comes to color and value, it is good to maintain an overall tone throughout, as to not have something obvious visually. Like, for example, if you're making a cobblestone texture, having variance per stone when it comes to color or value will add interest, but try not to deviate so much where one is red and one is completely blue. Or when it comes to value shifts, one really bright, one really dark, for example. So also choosing your patterns. When choosing your patterns, there's going to be natural patterns in architectural materials that will have a pattern, but trying to follow a pattern that makes sense, but also focusing on the idea that those patterns should create that pattern and it shouldn't be creating another pattern. Sometimes you can get in trouble by having other patterns appear within your texture. So you gotta be careful on that and make sure to look into it and stick with a pattern visually, and try to tweak placement until the pattern is hard to find. For example, in this cobblestone, all those tweaks I've been doing, I kind of naturally know how to do that after time because I've been practicing it for a long time. I've done probably hundreds and hundreds of textures by now. So to me, it becomes almost second nature to do this while I'm working on textures. It's good to always view your work at a distance. In this case, you can't literally get up from a computer. I guess you could and view it from a distance, but in this case, what I mean distance is going to a material and tiling it several times to see a large swash of your texture being placed on a plane. And at the end, these textures are going to go into a shader. For example, in Maya or Unreal, CryEngine, what have you. And those you'll be able to blend several textures together to lessen the effect of the tileability of these textures. And that's where you'll be able to really get a good balance. So having a tiling texture look tileable is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. For example, if I was making a variant of this cobblestone, if I made a version that looks really destroyed, you'll probably start noticing an obvious pattern, especially after like 4 tiles of it across. But if I was to only blend it on certain areas, then it'll start looking really natural. And the 2 blends of a cobblestone that's only a little bit damaged to one that's extremely damaged will work really well together. That's one thing we end up doing at work, is that we always have variants. So we always make a clean version or a semi-clean version, and then we made a really destroyed version. And then if we're really focusing on like a wall piece that's like a destroyed brick piece, for example, we actually grab some of those ZBrush models, or make ZBrush high poly models. In this case it would be procedural, but we would grab those ZBrush bricks and lay them down into groups and then retopple them to bake them out. That way we have 3 sets of textures and a couple of modules that we can place onto a wall and make it look extra broken, and it's being supported by Geo and by the texture. So those are kind of the basic ideas that when making textures, that's what I pay attention to, and I just continue learning as I go. Again, I want to mention that it's very important to start from the largest form first, because if the large form is not appealing, then everything else will not fall into place. Everything else will look generic. So you want to make something that really starts to appeal on the main large forms, and then go into the mid forms, the smaller forms, all the way to the micro and minute forms. It's very important to start that way in almost any art. Okay, so now we're going to get into the colorization of this cobblestone. Let me move the 3D view into place. I actually did a pre-setup, but basically the first thing we're going to do here is set up passes. So I'm going to break down my height map into several different passes that I can use as masks to selectively colorize those sections and have deep control of each. So first I want to go to the obvious, where I have this splatter detail, and I'm going to break these into different passes. So I have my wood chips, and these wood chips, that wood chip, then I have my pebbles, and I'm going to bake these into passes. So one thing that I could do is, in this case, on the top one, actually on the stones, I can just level this one out because it's using add linear dodge. So it's just adding it on top of the image itself, so it's not actually being, I guess, eaten up by the masks or by the height information. In this case, when I have the min lighten, these ones are actually going within the height information. So it's almost like it's going within the dirt and out of the dirt. So for this one, I was just create a levels node and get these stones, bring it in, and level it up until I have something like so. Now I still want to give a little bit of gradient because I'm still imagining. I'm thinking ahead here. In most of them, I'm gonna be able to colorize exactly a color, but in these cases, I kind of want a little bit half and half because these are gonna be the ones that are closest to the dirt. So they're getting a little bit, I guess, kind of like 50% of the dirt information on it. So I've seen a lot of people that tend to clamp it 100% or get really close. And when you're doing color, you kind of want a little bit of bleed between the colors. That way it feels more natural. And then for the wood bits, what I'm going to end up doing is that I need to do a blend. I need to place this on the bottom, place this on the top, and then do, is it divide? Actually, let me invert that. That on the top, and then instead of divide, it could actually be divide, but I would have to invert it to get the mask that I want, but I'll use subtract. So subtract, and then I put a levels node and connect my level into it, and also clamp it up, but not entirely all the way. Leave a little bit of softening, again, to let the color bleed into itself a little bit. And I'll duplicate this node and do the same here. And now I have my 3 masks, but I also want my grout mask, which I believe was right here. And I'll grab a gradient map and place it in there. So I'm using the gradient map pretty much just as a pin to move it into place up here. And I'm going to move this up a little bit because I want to allow some space for the normal, because I'm actually going to generate some more masks from this. So using the normal, I can create a couple masks with this. So I'll actually bring the stuff that I had down here. Started working on this texture, and I'll go through what these are doing. And I actually found out some neat little things that I didn't know before. So this one is the curvature smooth. So I plug in the normal to curvature smooth, and it gives me this representation. It's kind of like a curve. It is like a cavity curvature, but with a fall off. And then I went into the levels and into the value, did 0.5, level mid 0.5, level out low 0, and level out high 1. And then on this I did the same settings, but these are reversed. That way I was able to get the peaks and valleys. And then if I grab an invert node, actually I probably set that up incorrectly. So I should bring this up, bring that up, and there you go. This one has to be at 0.5. And now I have peaks, I have the peaks, and now I have the valleys, or more like the soft AO. And connect this to curvature, and it gives me this curvature. But then I used MG Edge Select. So just put edge, and it's called Edge Select right here. Actually, Edge Select right here. And with the edge select, I was able to grab the peaks and valleys. I did an invert of the curvature into here, so I plugged the curvature into an invert node here, and then connected that curvature into the edge select. No settings were changed, they both have the same settings, it's just the reason it changes the properties because this invert node. And now I have full control of these masks. So for example, I'm able to reset to default. Convex soften, convex edge width, so I can make a really soft cavity, have full control of it. That way it's not as grainy. Convex intensity. So I'm just going to set everything to default. And put convex intensity to 0.5, put this at 0.5, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out the settings I had before. Okay. And then I have edge blur, which just grabs the edge of, I believe it's curvature peaks, and then I can just grab and blur that one and then contrast it up. It's very similar to one above, so I might not actually use this, but we'll see. So now that I have these selected, I'm actually going to bring my colorization. And what I ended up doing is going to gradient editor and then pick gradient. And with pick gradient, what you can do is it gives you a crosshair, and then you can left click, hold, drag, and it'll start making a line, and it'll get the values of an image. So in this case, what I did is I brought up my Photoshop, Wrong one. Come on. Brought up my Photoshop and I dragged some of the values in here. And I made a mess, so I cleaned it up and I spaced them pretty equally. That way I can get some good random colors in there. They're mostly kind of like off gray, reds, and blues. And that plugged directly using my height information. I plugged it in. So you see what it does in here. And then I did the same thing for this one, but instead of plugging in that height, I plugged in the dirt height. So this was for my dirt, using this dirt height, plugged it into here, and then I ended up using colors just to give it a little bit of brown, and then I used it into a blend. So I'm going to connect this to my color. You'll see diffuse color. Actually, so that's correct. The only thing is that I need to connect. I was blending the dirt with my cobblestone color into this blend node, but I forgot to add the mask. In this case, I was using the grout mask, or in this case, the dirt mask. Wherever the dirt hits, that's where the brown will be, and wherever the cobble is, that's where the cobble will be. So I started colorizing the stone, and I already got a pretty good value tone here, and I'll show you how I did that. So as I said, I started with this gradient and set some values there. Then I leveled it, just darkened it a little bit, and then what I did here is what it's kind of like a jitter node. It brings in two hue, saturation, and lighten nodes. I want to undock them just so you can see, and they're basically connected to the same map, but based on a mask that's connected right here into opacity. It's a very grainy mask. I'm able to shift the saturation level, the lighten, either brightening it up or darkening it up to get slight different values. And then I copied that over again into here. So this became kind of like a tool. And in essence, what I would do in reality, I would probably copy this and make it into its own node, and probably have it down here. That's actually what I used to have before this install. I had this node somewhere in my library, so I'll probably recreate it later and put it in here with the two inputs. And then I copied that tool, that jitter tool, and I used another mask. In this case, I used a cloud, one of our levels, and I was able to create another set of variations. So it has like much more darkening, kind of like bluish tones in there. And then I used another mask. So it's two black and white, noises leveled into each other to create these white splotches. And the reason for the white splotches is because I was trying to emulate this area, this kind of white area on the reference. So I was trying to emulate that. So I got to a point where I was about to do more colorization to. Well, actually, I was actually gonna do more to the stone. I was gonna add more like cavity information, kind of like slightly brighter spots on the edges. So using blend, actually. Let me save this. I think I'm going to use, let me see what I can do with this mask. Again, I'm going to copy or duplicate this. I'm going to bring these two together, plug this one into the start, to the output, and then I want to use this as the mask. But then I want to create a levels node, actually. Levels node. And then connect it to there. I want to set the top one to default and the bottom one to its defaults, so it doesn't change color at all. I think I might just do a valley shift. Then, as you see, I'm just using this mask. Come on. Using this mask and plugging it into here and adding very kind of like this light edge variation to it. So what I can do at this point is, actually I already have it attached to a levels node. I can level it out when I dock it into there, so I know where what it's doing. I'm going to clamp it down a little. Let's just tweak it with the levels node and see where it goes. That looks pretty good. Okay. So you see how I'm starting to gather more and more detail? And I'm just doing it selectively. First kind of like washes. I tend to always explain my color process as watercolor. So basically I'm using washes, layering colors together and almost ink-like until I can start getting more refined and more refined as I go. And I think doing the process like that, you can get some really rich colors at the end. And that's why I always kind of follow these steps of layering and layering of colors. Is something that's taught in painting class and traditional classes quite a bit, and it works really well in a traditional medium. It tends to work Also pretty good in digital medium, but you don't necessarily need to work this way. I tend to do it because I can split colors or think about colors in that way more clear than other ways. I've seen people who totally ignore this way of colorizing, but end up having a really rich palette. Okay, so let's go to do another blend node, blend into there, blend that into there. This time I'm going to grab a tighter cavity. Let's see. Grab this one into there. Grab a levels node, plug it into my mask, start tweaking. So what I'm starting to mimic here is more or less where the stones edges got caught up with something and started kind of scraping that area. So all the kind of edges have a little bit of scraping. And to make it even a little bit more realistic, what I could do is, so it's not equally all over the place, I could add my mask into a blend node and then go and use this cloud and set it to multiply and then connect it into there. And then if I level it up, I'll only have some of that cavity information on some of the stones and not all of them. So it'll make it look a little bit more realistic, I guess. I'm going to use another blend node, in this case set it to multiply onto itself, and then I'm going to grab kind of the cavity information. Actually, grab the wrong one. This information into there. And sure enough, it looks like I'm adding occlusion, but I'm going to change this up a little bit. Instead of that, I want to put overlay. Then I'm going to grab an HISL node and then place it in there. bump up the saturation. Bump up the saturation so you get some of that green start accumulating, and kind of those warmer reds. See, I'm starting to get quite a bit of saturation in there, or different colors. I mean, I have like tons of washes of blues, greens, magentas, orange. They're all mixing to this kind of like gray stone. And again, that's the importance of balancing all these colors together, because at the end, sure, from far away it looks gray. But when you're mixing all these colors together, up close, it's so rich. You get so many washes of color. And that's just what makes something appealing to the eye. This actually starts to vibrate. You start getting, especially once you start combining opposite colors. For example, when you mix in a little bit of reds with greens, you start getting this really nice vibration. You could put it really intense and then it'll look like a clown car, of course. But if it's only slight, intensity of those colors, saturation, then it's just gonna be rich. It's gonna be a nice, rich overall material. You can see I am going. Some areas are getting a little darker in here. So I gotta be careful with that when adding some of this into it. And I keep thinking, well, this is gonna be a physically based material, so I'm just gonna lighten that, maybe bring the saturation a little bit up to get those greens in. So I have this kind of like blues in there. Again, in albedos, you don't really want to mimic the AO or light information on your textures, but some people would say, well, adding a little bit of that cavity information on the edges would equal that, and they might be right. In this case, I'm choosing to go this way because of the stylization of these textures that I want. And at the end, it's all going to matter about the passes, if it looks good. Though the cavity might be a little too intense here. I might go back and reduce it. Let's try reducing it just a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit better. Okay. So now you're starting to see, well, the stones are really rich, but the ground is not. And I'll have to say that's a really good point. So we did add the ground material here, but the blend, but this blend is actually bringing so much color in. So I almost want to do a blend of these two together at this point. Bring that in, and bring that in, and then connect to this. And do kind of like a representation of each other. Let's see if I can do an overlay. Multiply. white. Overlay. Okay, overlay seems to be working pretty nice. And just like that, I was able to get some of that green into my dirt. Now it could be a little too intense. So it's just a matter of tweaking. Just organizing my graph a little bit here. And almost I. Okay, so you can do this, blend. Oh, what happened? What did I do? I don't know what I did. Okay, blend. This one to this one. Then I'm going to add this mask to that mask. Hue and saturation node into here. I'm going to darken it quite a bit. Also add tons of saturation for no apparent reason. Just want to see if it's working. And connect levels to level. I'm going to clamp this a little bit and get kind of that edging in there, so the edges are there. I'm going to make it a little bit yellowish. What's going on here? It's set to copy. I'm going to put a hue saturation on this one. Increase the brown. And now I have a pretty good dirt in there. It's dirty. Okay, let me organize this. I'm going to stop it here for now, and then we'll continue in a little bit on the next lesson.